Okay, looks like we have everybody. Appreciate all of you being so patient. We have about 90 minutes to go through 2 items. So we're going to reconvene the Educator Preparation Committee. The first item, 4C, is possible pathways for current education specialist credential holders interested in earning the new education specialist credential. This item is being presented by William Hatrick and Sarah Solari Colombini. This is an information action item. Ms. Solari Colombini, will you begin?
Certainly, and I've turned off my video because it says my internet connection is unstable. So if I should cut out, we have a plan. William's going to take over, so and I will reconnect.
You sound really good right now, so it's
okay. Great. So I will start. Thank you for having me. This agenda item brings forth the concept of a bridge option for existing education specialist credential holders who may be interested in updating their credential to the new authorization that will accompany the education specialist credential beginning in the summer/fall of 2022. Over the past few years, the Commission has revised the credential structure of the education specialist credential as a part of a larger effort in the state, which was to better meet the needs of students with disabilities in California schools. With this revision, new program standards and teaching performance expectations were developed to align better with the way general education teachers were prepared, so that the vision of one system for all, as was set forth in the Special Education Statewide Task Force report issued in 2015, could be achieved with the hopes of creating a less siloed approach towards the way general education and special education teachers are prepared. With the adoption of a set of universal TPEs, the Commission has set the stage for a common set of expectations for teacher performance that all teachers will share as part of their preparation starting in the summer/fall of 2022. The new credential structure includes new authorization statements that reflect the scope of broader preparation that new education specialists will receive. Existing education specialist credential holders will still be authorized to teach the population of students they are currently serving and will maintain that ability into the future as long as they continue to renew their credential. There is not a requirement that existing credential holders seek out the new authorization. However, some may want the broader authorization that accompanies the new credentials, and this item examines the possibilities for that to happen.
Okay, so as a result of the new credential structure adopted by the Commission in 2018, education specialists will not be as restricted by federal disability categories. The new credentials place a greater emphasis on the individual student's needs, mild to moderate or extensive, and expand the disability categories for each authorization. This shift required a change in the authorization statements for 3 of the 5 credentials within the new structure. The early childhood special education, mild to moderate, and the extensive support needs credentials all have revised authorization statements. As a reminder, the early childhood special ed credential has expanded to include kindergarten, and the mild to moderate and extensive support needs credentials have broader and more flexible authorization statements that are not as limited to federal disability categories. Having a broader scope of preparation will allow the teacher to work with a greater variety of students according to their specific individual needs, in addition to their identified disability. The chart on page 3 compares the current and future credentials and which disability categories are included in the authorization statements. The purpose of a bridge option for existing education specialist credential holders is necessary, as it would allow the teachers with those existing credentials to expand their authorization to allow them to work with students across more disability categories if they so choose. For example, no teachers with the current mild moderate disabilities or moderate severe disabilities credentials are authorized to work with students with orthopedic impairment or traumatic brain injury, unless they do additional coursework to obtain the added authorizations for these disabilities. However, these will be included in the preparation programs for the new credentials beginning in summer/fall 2022. The bridge would allow teachers who are interested in expanding their current authorization to do so, though it would not be required.
So the broader authorization in the new education specialist credentials for early childhood special education and extensive support needs are reflected in the modified teaching performance included in the preparation of education specialist candidates. Staff identified which teaching performance expectations or added to the preparation content to consider possible routes for existing education specialist credential. Those teaching performance expectations appendix of this item. With the identified areas that are included within the new authorization statements, existing education specialist credential holders could verify that they have met the content included in those in several ways. Staff has identified 3 possibilities. The commission may have additional suggestions. A credential holder could use coursework, which could be verified through a transcript, professional development, which could be verified through completion or some other means, and or prior knowledge and experience is verified through demonstrated competence to demonstrate mastery of the additional TPEs, which also could be demonstrated through a portfolio submission. Any one of these 3 or a combination of these could be used to verify that an existing education specialist has mastered the additional preparation content. The item provides an example of how an existing education specialist through demonstrated competence can meet an element of one of the early childhood education specialist TPEs. Once a current education specialist has provided evidence that he or she has mastered the additional preparation content, then that individual would be eligible for the updated authorization. So, with the options that are identified, staff is looking for guidance as to what are appropriate options for an existing education specialist to update a credential, and how might the options be verified, and outside of the obvious ways that we currently employ, which are through approved programs, and which entities are really going to be, who's going to verify that?
So based on your discussion today, staff will continue to work on developing a bridge process and the various ways that current ed specialists could be able to earn the equivalent authorization. So thank you, and with that, we can answer any questions you may have after public comment.
Great, thank you both so much, and I'm glad that the video or the streaming worked. Okay, so we're now going to open it up for public comments. Do we have any public comments?
Yes, Danette Brown, please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Danette Brown, and I am a teacher in La Habra, California, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the California Teachers Association. We really appreciate this opportunity to discuss the bridge option for current credential holders to expand their authorization. And we did submit written comments on this item. I'm going to focus my testimony on under 4C in our letter, our second paragraph. And I do appreciate Mr. Hattrick and Ms. Solari in their presentation and in the agenda item really intentionally pointing out that this would be optional if candidates so choose to pursue this. But I wanted to bring some experience from the field that when previous opportunities to expand authorizations have become available, the interpretation in the field was not always that it was optional. So because of those reasons, we would definitely strongly recommend that as you move forward, you consider putting language in the regulations similar to language found in local option authorizations that really explicitly outlines that this is optional and it's not mandatory for current credential holders to continue that. So that's our recommendation moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments?
No, we do not have any other public comments.
Great. Thank you, Recording Secretary. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? I can start with a question. To what extent would the parameters around coursework and professional development be defined? Like how much flexibility would be allowed and where would the locus of control be?
Well, I think that really depends on the approach or approaches that the commission would potentially look at endorsing moving forward. If you look in the appendix, you have the specified TPEs there that are found only in the new credentials. And so those would really be the focus, I guess, of what a current existing ed specialist credential holder would need to meet to earn the equivalent authorization. So I think the flexibility actually comes a lot with which pathway is allowed for a current teacher, either the portfolio or coursework or prior experience, that kind of thing.
Okay, and then Ms. Clark, you want to get in and then we'll go to Commissioner Grenoshire.
Yes, the special education bridge for this would be put into regulations, and it's the one thing that's holding the regulatory package up to come to you for the whole special education reform. In the regulations, this would be determined. So we have a variety of situations. In some cases, an authorization is only available after someone completes a commission-approved program, and that program is included in the accreditation process. That's probably the most stringent and the most monitored approach. There have been other times where people have been able to get an authorization through some professional learning or professional growth. That took place during the 1969 version of the EL training, where county offices provided training, and the person was able to get an EL authorization. There's another example in the TPSL that you put in place a couple of years ago, where employers are able to provide verification that the person they're using to serve on the teaching permit for statutory leave has done the initial preparation or the ongoing learning that they need to do to keep the TPSL. So there is a wide range of possibilities. A fourth option is when there was a professional growth requirement, the teacher documented the 150 hours, and that was the verification. So the verification is a very broad set of options, and it's really for you to guide staff to say, how do you want this to be verified? How do you want this to be monitored for current education specialist teachers?
Thank you so much. Commissioner Grenoshire.
Ms. Clark, you anticipated the question that was percolating in my head about how do we go about verifying this and what past experience have commission staff had with doing just that. So I really appreciate the bridge pathways and how this has been constructed. I think it's going to help the field for those ed specialist teachers who want to have the additional information and the additional authorization. So I want to understand more about verification and verification that adheres to or supports our common trunk preparation for ed specialist teachers. So I want to make sure that that is really front and center of any verification. And then I think a question for Sarah or William, what entities, again, thinking of past experience, what entities could be involved? Is it county offices of education? Is it local ed prep programs? If you could just tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, this is Sarah. So I'm thinking that that's what we're kind of seeking some guidance from you about. So as Terry mentioned, in the past, we had the SB 1969, where you had county offices who certainly provided the professional development for the EL and provided certificates to teachers to verify that they in fact had the EL training appropriate. So, and there's been suggestions that we have the California Collaborative for it's CCCE, who's they're supporting districts to improve. So we could have agencies or support systems out there to verify and pull together professional development targeted towards, of course, these TPEs for teachers. So, but that's where we're looking to you to say, okay, we know we have the common routes. We know we have our approved programs. Who else would you feel comfortable with verifying that a teacher has in fact satisfied the additional content?
I would like to point out that in this specific instance, we have another avenue that isn't necessarily been thought of, is the local SELPAs. The local SELPAs do special education planning for their regional area. Each of these credentials is 7 or 8 TPEs. It's very unlikely that these 7 or 8 TPEs exist in any higher education's institution in a single class. And you clearly don't want teachers out there having to do multiple classes to address these 7 or 8 TPEs. But a county office, a SELPA, they might put together a professional development offering that very clearly addresses these specific identified competencies. Another area to really consider is like for the early childhood special education, the issue here is going up into kindergarten. It's very possible a teacher already holds a general education credential, and if they held a general education credential and an early childhood education specialist, there's a lot of logic if you look at what's in the TPEs, that by holding a general education credential, they are ready to teach kindergarten. So it also seems like a variety of verification options might be appropriate across these 3 credentials.
Yeah, Commissioner Wall.
So because this is not required, it's voluntary, I think that a range of approaches is called for, because I think we want to create as many ways for people to make this happen. And I also think about, I think that Terry's comment is right on, that because this is going to be across courses, there's not necessarily going to be a strong incentive for programs to set up credential paths out of courses. So to me, thinking this, I'm just talking out loud, I'm thinking it through, I think a professional development route would be a likely successful route to encourage people to actually get this additional information, training, capability. And I think we have to remember that, because if we don't have a structural requirement, I think we're going to have to create as easy of a mechanism as possible. Professional development strikes me as that route. And then I think the challenge is in the administrative incentive on the side of the entity that is doing the documentation. And so I don't know that I have that worked through yet, but I think that I think we have to think about how to do that.
Chair Sloan.
I actually think Chair Martin had her hand up first. I'd love to go.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. And then me.
Go ahead, Commissioner Martin, and then we'll go to Chair.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't. I was agreeing. I was saying yes.
Oh, okay. Well, earlier I thought I saw your hand up too, and I was like, is she adjusting?
I was cheering. I was saying yes.
Okay, cheering. There we go. All right. We're misinterpreting these signals. Okay. Chair Sloan, it seems like it's you.
Thank you. I agree as well. And then the other thing that I think of is I look through our TPEs. A big part of our TPEs is not just demonstrating knowledge, but it's demonstrating skills and abilities and adjusting teaching. And that can't just happen in online webinar or course or et cetera, we've got to make sure that in verifying people's experiences with what we want them to know and be able to do does actually have them engaging directly in some way with the actual practice of supporting students and teaching students. And so while we want to be offering multiple opportunities, it does seem like the county offices of ed, school districts, where children are being taught is probably a good place for people to be learning this work.
Great, thank you. So again, this is an item for us to provide direction to the commission staff. And so it sounds like, we all like the pathways around coursework, professional development, prior knowledge and experience. But I wonder if they might want some more direction around the authorization. I hear districts and basically LAs, county offices and districts. Does the staff want to help us help you with a little bit more of directive questions? I appreciate Commissioner Wall kind of thinking out loud. Other commissioners have any thoughts? Terry, how can we help you guys?
William, Sarah, does it seem to you that we have a good amount of direction? They're comfortable with all three of the avenues that staff has thought of. There's comfort in a variety of ways to document. We have met with employers. I think we need to meet with employers and preparers again to talk about this now that we have a little bit of your guidance. Our goal would be to bring back a plan to you that could then be moved towards the regulatory process. So unless you have any strong additional information to give us, I think we may have what we need to move into the next steps.
I think so, and I would emphasize really thinking about what the demonstrated competence looks like, what Sheriff Sloan just raised a bit ago. And Sheriff Sloan, on that note, another comment, direction?
Just a question. CTA submitted a letter with 2 questions, and I apologize if you did answer this. Then a question was, does the original ed specialist credential remain in place while a second separate ed specialist credential is issued? Or how is that going to look?
We'll defer to Erin Skubal for that. So I see Erin's on.
I had a feeling. Yeah, so while we haven't fully answered that question yet, one option would be to replace the individual's current authorization. So for example, if they have mild moderate, we would replace that mild moderate credential authorization with the mild to moderate support needs authorization. And we would have to do a deep dive to ensure that that didn't take away any scope of their existing authorization, that we were only adding to their authorization to expand the scope of it, which I believe that is the case, but we would want to kind of do some research and make sure that's the case. So that's the direction we would head towards. We don't want an individual to have to obtain 2 different credentials and maintain 2 different credentials. We'd want whatever new authorization they get to either replace their existing or to be an add-on authorization that would complement their existing authorization. So that would be the 2 possibilities.
Thanks, Erin. And then Commissioner Martinez, I think I saw Commissioner Kung's hand raised just to help you see your field.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Go for it, Commissioner Kung.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with everyone what they said about the coursework, professional development. I was just thinking about the prior knowledge, experience, demonstrated competence. Possibly, maybe we could do something like the TPAs, because that's already something that we have available, and that could possibly maybe be used to demonstrate competence. Just throwing that out as an idea.
I agree with that idea as well. Now this time, for sure, Commissioner Martin has her hand up virtually.
Yes, I did. I did it both ways. Thank you. I'm just going to echo the same comments about what CTA submitted. When I was looking at this item, definitely is going to help a number of teachers who currently hold the credential, but the Ed Specialist credential, and it would help a lot of teachers in San Diego Unified, but across the state. But I was interested in CTA's comment, and I wanted to clarify the status of the Ed Specialist while the individual's in the process of obtaining the new credential. And in reading it, our assumption, I looked at it with our HR director, actually, our chief of HR, and our assumption was that the old credential would remain in place while the new credential was being sought. But I didn't want to assume that and be wrong in my assumption or have another way of looking at it that you might be considering.
No, that's absolutely right. Their credential would remain valid as long as the term of it is valid. They would be able to continue teaching the same population of students they've been working with. And while they are in the process, whether it's coursework or portfolio, that kind of thing, working on that to earn the new authorization, they would still hold their existing credential and be able to work on that.
Okay, that makes it super clear. I think it's what people were assuming, but I wanted to
Sure.
that question and just have us say it out loud in this meeting. So I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, and Mr. Hatrick, you also provided another example of portfolio as a demonstrated competence. So, all right, well, it sounds like from Mary, and I don't see any virtual hands up or video hands up. It sounds like the staff feel like they've received the direction, and this is not an action item. This is for information only, and to provide us with direction, but we do not need a motion. So if folks are ready, we're going to go ahead and move on to 4D to keep everything moving. All right, and I see that we have Commissioner Barnes back. Okay, item 4D is update on the development of the Education Specialist Teaching Performance Assessment. This item is being presented by Amy Reesing and James Webb. This is an information item. Miss Riesling, Miss Riesing, I want to call you a wine, Miss Riesling. Miss Riesing, it's only like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Will you please begin?
Thank you, and good afternoon, commissioners. This is an information item, and James Webb and I will be presenting our work with our Education Specialist Design Team to you. So this agenda item presents an update on the development of a teaching performance assessment for education specialist candidates, as well as a summary of the design team meetings from February to July 2020. Guiding principles for the continued design of this assessment and pilot study plans are provided for your consideration and discussion. I want to start first with a little background. Just want to point out that at your February 2018 meeting, you adopted a revised credential structure. This new structure included 5 preliminary teaching credentials, which we just spoke about in the last item. And subsequent to this work, you determined that every teacher candidate should take and pass a TPA to earn their preliminary education specialist teaching credential. At your June 2018 meeting, you reviewed proposed program standards and teaching performance expectations, as well as proposed subject matter requirements for the credential. And you acted to do the following things: affirm the current subject matter requirements for all education specialist credentials, adopt teaching performance expectations for early childhood special ed, deaf and hard of hearing, and visual impairments credentials. And you affirm that the early childhood special education teaching credential would authorize teaching and services for birth through kindergarten once the regulatory process had been completed. At your August 2018 meeting, you adopted program standards and TPEs for the Ed Specialist mild to moderate and extensive support needs credentials. And in April 2019, you adopted authorization statements for those credentials. As we have spoken with you about before, I just want to remind you that one of the most important outcomes in your reform work in both special ed and general ed over the last many years is the development of common universal TPEs and the concept that both would be met by both general education and special education candidates. So our universal TPEs that we've been working with in our multiple subject, single subject arena, and then now our specialized special education TPEs that special educators would meet both. The universal TPEs establish a common foundation for all teachers based on the concept that all teachers are teachers of all students, that all students are general education students first, and that all students need intervention at different points in their academic career. The Commission's goal in establishing universal TPEs was to ensure that all teachers learn the fundamentals of teaching, ideally in common coursework that allows for collaboration across different credential types, multiple subject, single subject, education specialist. And then each candidate would specialize in the special ed world in their specialized content. The development of the Ed Specialist TPA has taken place against the backdrop of these significant changes in the framing of teacher preparation across this range of credentials. How to balance attention between the universal TPEs and the specialized TPEs has been a driving question for us as staff, our stakeholders, and our design team members as we've moved through our work together since February. So with that background reviewed, I want to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, James. James?
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, commissioners. I will continue with design team meetings. We have included a number of summary points to you in this item. And so my goal will be to summarize and bring out the most important elements of our design team meetings. As you can see in Appendix A, we have 23 members on our design team who represent a number of educator preparation programs, induction programs, and a vast majority of the state that is represented by geographic regions. In addition, all 5 credential areas of emphasis for the education specialist credential are represented on our design team. And we also have a number of liaisons from the California Department of Education, including a specialist within special education, a specialist within English language development, and a parent who was recommended for appointment by the California Department of Education. As you can see, we have been meeting consistently for the past several months. When the COVID pandemic hit in March, we had to move to an online format, so only the February meeting was an in-person meeting. At our February meeting, we reviewed the history of state policy leading up to the TPA requirement in California. And another important element that we did is that the design team members brainstormed and discussed different options for a designated education specialist, Cal TPA, which was based on their firsthand experiences and research with the field. In our March meeting, the 2015 Special Education Task Force report, which was a joint effort between the California Department of Education and the California Teaching Commission on Teacher Credentialing, was reviewed to see the recommendations that were brought forward for the development of a performance assessment. And as we continued, the design team members did brainstorm ways to adapt the Cycle 1 that's in the current Cal TPA for inclusion as the Ed Specialist Cal TPA Cycle 1. Our April meeting had us deconstructing and analyzing an actual submission from a current extensive support needs candidate for the purposes of identifying the universal TPEs that Amy spoke about that exist in the cycle and consider what a similarly constructed cycle for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA might look like. And in addition, we also discussed with the design team to receive their input on recommendations for assessor criteria for when the Ed Specialist Cal TPA is in its pilot study, field study, and when it becomes operational. Our May meeting, we invited Erin Christensen, who is a consultant with the California Department of Education, to present information about students with disabilities in California and data that supported the Special Education Task Force report and information that needed to be heard by the design team as it designs the assessment. In addition, Teresa Hawk from the CDE also spoke about the CDE's perspective on supporting language development for students with disabilities. We also had our members work in small groups to review the requirements for focus students, video and annotation, and the reflection and application prompts to consider the adaptations for the Ed Specialist programs. Our June meeting had design team members reviewing each step of Cycle 1, providing information about what candidates would be expected to do and how prep programs could support these candidates as they complete Cycle 1 of the Ed Specialist Cal TPA. In addition, we further expanded our discussion on assessor qualifications under the new credential structure to help design team members and the field understand how the 7 areas of emphasis that were in the old program standards would correspond to the new 5 areas of specialization. In our most recent meeting in July, we discussed the information on the pilot study and the program-specific information to assist with understanding that process. And in addition to launch us into our continued work with the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, we looked at a Cycle 2 submission from the same extensive support needs candidate so that design team members could work in small groups to share how those credential-specific teaching performance expectations could be assessed in a cycle that focuses on assessment-driven instruction to support the 5 different categories. Moving forward to our bias review, the Commission's Bias Review Committee will review the draft of the Ed Specialist Cal TPA Cycle 1 in September of 2020, and then additional bias reviews are scheduled to occur throughout the process prior to the operational administration in fall of 2022. I'm now going to return back to Amy, who will now provide information about the structure of the Ed Specialist Cal TPA and its key components.
Thank you, James. The Education Specialist Design Team that James just talked to you about, our series of meetings that we've been able to conduct, Commission staff, James and I and others, and the evaluation systems through this series of discussions have come up with and determined an overall structure. And so I wanted to take a moment to walk you through that. So the design team, after many conversations, deliberations, looking at actual candidate work that was done based on the current developed Cal TPA cycles, determined that they would align the key qualities of the Gen Ed TPA process to their work in the special education landscape. And so candidates will follow a task-based structure. Candidates will complete at 2 different times instructional cycles during their teacher preparation program. And of course, candidates will have to pass both cycles independently, and each cycle would follow the plan, teach, assess, reflect, and apply cycle. Having 2 cycles supports that educative quality that we have experienced in the general, in the Cal TPA. In other words, candidates complete 1 cycle, submit it, receive scores back within 3 weeks, and then are able to get support, and then they would engage in the 2nd cycle. And that the cycles would measure both a selection, of course, of the universal TPEs. Remember, we have many, 45 elements. We can't assess all of them, but a selection of TPEs aligned with what the current Cal TPA Cycle 1 is assessing into, and then also additional education specialist specific TPEs. In addition, the candidates would, of course, do this during their coursework. It would be embedded in coursework and in clinical practice, and they would be supported while they engage in this assessment by faculty and supervising teachers at the district in which they're working. They would receive both that analytic feedback and formative feedback as they go through the 2 cycles. And based on that feedback, then, right, they would get that support. Also, the candidate, if they're in the same classroom for both cycles, that's fine. They could work with the same class of students, small group of students, or individual students. And finally, given some of that structure that will very much mirror the structure that we currently have in the Gen Ed TPA, we need to, of course, test out this thinking and this hypothesis that this will work. And so we are moving towards a pilot study in the fall, this fall of 2020. And The other important property around cycle 1 is that the 5 education specialist credential areas determined together that all 5 types of education specialist credentials would engage in cycle 1 as it is written in a more generic way to cross all 5 cycles. When we get to cycle 2 development, which is starting this month and will go on through the fall, we will work with the individual 5 education specialist areas to create a more specific to the credential area cycle 2 assessment. And that assessment is scheduled to be pilot tested starting in the winter of 2021 throughout the spring. So we're doing it in sort of a stepwise fashion, hoping to pilot test cycle 1 this fall with those programs that are feeling that they can do that with us, and then moving to develop cycle 2 and then pilot test cycle 2 in the spring. So there are some very specific components that I want to bring to your attention. There's a great deal explained in the item, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do want to highlight the ones that are additive. So we're keeping through design team discussions sort of the frame and structure of the current instructional cycles that we have for multiple subject and single subject, but there are some additional components that I want to bring to your attention. The first one is around focus students. So there would still be 3 focus students identified in cycle 1. The first focus student would include an English learner and or student with a language-based or expressive language need. The second focus student would be a student with an identified disability, physical, cognitive, or social. And the third, and or gate identified. And the third focus student would be a student who has experienced trauma either in or outside of school. All 3 focus students would be on an IEP. Some may still be on an IFSP depending on their age, but they would have the IFSP to refer to. But one of the agreements was that it would only be doing performance assessments with children age 3 and older. And we know at the 3rd birthday that the child receives an IEP. And so it's really based on IEP, but all the focus students would hold an IEP. The other point is that there will be a much more focus on how instructional support personnel are used during instruction. And that will get woven into the expectations for instructional design as well as into the rubrics. The notion of focusing on assistive technologies as needed for different students in the education specialist areas. The design team, after much discussion, also determined that one cycle would be focused on the instruction of literacy, and the second cycle would be focused on the instruction of mathematics. And again, it would be up to the candidate and the program to determine which cycle would focus on which content area. And of course, they can be integrated with other content, just like in the Gen Ed TPA. So it could be literacy and art, etc. But the measurement would be around the capacity to teach literacy. The other point of discussion that turned into a component was that for our VI and DHH candidates, they often are in learning settings where they're working with one student at a time. So for VI and DHH students, they may work with 3 students, one being each of their focus students, and do that work with that individual student and complete the cycle by thinking about instruction for that one individual student and the assets they bring and the learning needs that they have. The analytic rubrics themselves were reviewed. Additional educational specialist specific TPEs were infused along with the current universal TPEs that are measured by those rubrics, and we'll be pilot testing that and how that holds up. Also, it was very important to our ed specialist design team that anything in a rubric that was related to a candidate's capacity to use universal design for learning pedagogy, that get moved out of, it often sat at level 5 because it was a relatively new concept for multiple subject, single subject teachers 5 years ago when we first developed these performance assessments. So it's been moved out of level 5 into level 3. Level 3 of the 5-level rubric is where we expect candidates to reach hopefully, as they get support and learn to teach. So that's been moved down and infused more thoroughly throughout the Cycle 1 Education Specialist TPA. And then, of course, aggregated data would come back and inform accreditation of these education specialist programs. And of course, the aggregated data would eventually be posted on the dashboard, as we've talked about with the Cal TPA as well. There are 4 steps, as I said, so I'm going to just quickly walk you through those. So in Cycle 1, the cycle that has been developed to date, and we are poised to begin pilot testing, we'll be sending out information to all of our programs about being involved in the pilot. We, of course, hope that as many programs as possible can be involved in the pilot. Even though we wouldn't score everything that came into us, we would score a sample, a purposeful sample, to help us understand how to iterate for the field test. But we do want all programs that want to be involved to be involved. So with that, 4 steps in Cycle 1. So remember, in Cycle 1, the candidate is working with a class of students, a small learning group of students, or an individual student, and they are learning about that student and students deeply, their assets and their learning needs, and they are thinking about content-specific standards and the curriculum frameworks and planning one lesson, and also incorporating the IEP, IFSP, perhaps in some case goals into this lesson, and then thinking about and describing then those assets and learning needs. That all happens in step 1. And in Cycle 1, step 1 has 4 rubrics attached to it. So it's the predominance of the cycle is around a candidate's ability to plan instruction based on the assets and learning needs of their students and their IEP goals. Step 2 then leads the candidate into actually teaching this and video recording that lesson and or activity. And in that lesson and or activity that they're offering their students, they then video record that. They go in back to the system and annotate those video clips. And in those clips, they're going to be showing us where they have developed a positive and safe learning environment, where they've connected to prior learning and set expectations for content-specific learning, where they've engaged their students in age and developmentally appropriate content-specific higher order thinking, how they've monitored student understanding through assessments. And in addition, candidates would demonstrate how they're incorporating those IEP goals, IFSP, IEP goals into meeting the diverse needs of their students. So that first step is planning. Second step is teaching and assessing and video recording and annotating. Third step, now they step back and reflect on what they have learned and they do an analysis of the needs of the students based on that lesson and their own learning from teaching that lesson. And they explain how they will, moving forward, they will be flexible to incorporate those in the moment adaptations that we need to make as teachers as we work with students. So an important reflective point in the cycle, leading them then to step 4, which is apply. And this is where then the candidate has some choice. They can either write their response or video record themselves, providing a verbal response. But in this step of apply, candidates explain what they would do differently to advance the learning of the class as a whole, the small learning group or the individual, and how they would teach this lesson or activity again, and what they would do the same or differently to improve learning for the students. So quite a bit of work from our candidates throughout that cycle. And so with that, and I just want to pause too and really thank the design team that's been working with us. Their expertise has been just invaluable to us, and their excitement about this work is just infectious. So with that, James, take us through what we're measuring, please.
Sure. Thank you, Amy. And I want to echo Amy's point about our design team. They have been absolutely wonderful to work with. So I'm going to just lead you through a brief overview of the analytic rubric essential questions for the Ed Specialist Cal TPA. Again, you have a great deal of information and summary in your agenda item, but I just want to focus your attention to specific steps. As you can see, step 1 plan has the most information contained within it because, again, the cycle is focusing on planning instruction for students. And as Amy referred to, the design team was very, very adamant about universal designs for learning as a structure for which content would be made accessible to students. So questions 1 and 2 actually make up one rubric because there are a total of 8 rubrics, but we teased them out just so that you could see them and identify them a little bit better. But in step 1, the emphasis is around planning based on student assets and learning needs and how to develop instructional and grouping strategies to create that safe and positive learning environment. One of the things that the design team was very much in favor of is the inclusion and the utilization of instructional support personnel to be brought in planning to make the content be fully engaged or make students fully engaged with the content. That was a piece that they really wanted to see, and it did make its way into our cycle and rubrics. As we move to teach and assess, really the focus is looking at how that candidate maintains the positive and safe learning environment that supports all students that they built in step 1. And again, how did they utilize instructional strategies, including the use of materials and instructional support personnel to actively engage all students? Step 3, we asked them to go back to steps 1 and 2 and analyze and describe what it is that they've had as a moment of reflection. And then in the application phase, we asked them to really think about what they've learned in cycle 1, again, going back to citing evidence from steps 1 and 2 and 3 to see how they can move forward as they plan future lessons. So I'm going to turn it back over to Amy and let her share with you about the pilot study parameters.
Great, thanks, James. So again, I mentioned the pilot study earlier. We are prepared to begin the pilot study of cycle 1 this fall. However, we are very aware of the situation that many of our programs and candidates and school districts are facing as they support children and families. And we may need to delay or push, I guess is a better word, perhaps, the pilot study a little bit into the spring. Our hope, though, is that we can have a number of candidates that may be able to engage this fall, and we can begin to study and learn how this cycle is taking place as it's being used by candidates and supported by program faculty. But we are very aware that we may need to push it a little bit if we don't get data that is really reflective of the assessment and how it ought to be rolling out. So we do want to point out that the results of the pilot will be used to revise the cycle for the field tests. So remember, in this year, we get the opportunity to pilot study and really survey candidates, program faculty, and assessors who work with us when we score this submissions from cycle 1 and cycle 2 to understand the iteration that we need to move through to be ready for a field test. And as we tell our design team members at every single meeting we're with them, it is not until we put these assessments in front of our candidates and try them out with candidates and programs that we truly understand how we need to adjust and revise and make them appropriate to the measurement we're trying to gather and to support candidate learning. So the earlier we can get into field study, really the better for us to understand how to iterate. But that being said, we are hoping to pilot studies beginning in October of 2020. Our materials are currently under review by editors and being put into the online system for our candidates and for programs. And the study will most likely run through spring of 2021. The evidence by candidates is submitted in the online system. This year, we're so lucky. 5 years ago, we didn't really have a full built-out system, and we had to use other types of online systems that were a little awkward. Now we can use the system we have in place, and candidates can submit, and everyone can begin to use this system in the pilot. And once all that is submitted to us and we get our 150 sample responses across our 5 education specialist areas, and we study them and score them and discuss them, we can then move on with that work of getting ready for the field test. So pilot results will not be directly returned to candidates, but they will be shared with programs and at the aggregate level. And they'll see the aggregate level of data for their programs that are involved and are scored, and then also, of course, for the whole set of candidates involved in the pilot. So there is feedback to programs, and programs learn a great deal from being involved. So we're really hoping and inviting all of our education specialist programs to join us if they can in this pilot during this coming year. All, of course, evidence submitted will be kept very confidential. Nothing is forward facing in this system, this online system. Everything is private and secure. And also, I already spoke about the importance for programs to join us as soon as possible. And we will be offering lots of supports that James will tell you about here in a second. Again, our target number is 150 across the 5 credential areas. We do know that for our deaf and hard of hearing community and our visually impaired community, that it's a much smaller population of candidates and programs. And so our numbers will be balanced and representative, but we will attempt to look at 150 and score 150 responses. The other thing I want to point out, which I forgot to talk to you about a little earlier structurally, as we've worked with our DHH community, we've come to understand that when we come into our Cycle 2 development, we will be developing actually 2 versions for DHH, one that is ASL related and the other one that is going to be supportive of our community who is in the pedagogical area of listening and speaking. Very different pedagogical approaches. And we really want to support our deaf and hard of hearing community, obviously, and measure appropriately. So we will be having, at least for pilot testing, 2 versions in Cycle 2 only, because remember, Cycle 1, all candidates will engage. And so with that detail around our pilot that we are about to engage in, I'll turn it back to James just for a little bit more information for you about how we plan to support all of our programs moving forward.
Since the redesign of the Cal TPA and the introduction of the Cal APA, a number of supports have already been in place for the education prep community, and we encourage them to join these different approaches that we do notify programs in the PSD e-news that is produced every Friday afternoon. What our plan is to develop specific supports and topics that will be inclusive of the education specialist community. And as we continue moving forward with the pilot study and with our development of the cycles, we hope to see that these are woven into the program design to allow for the embedded performance assessment. As you can see in the item, there are a number of items that are highlighted, but 2 things I did want to bring to your attention because they are fairly new is, with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the things that we have been able to do is to expand the Commission's YouTube channel, and we have developed playlists for the Cal TPA, Cal APA, Ed TPA, and soon to be coming the Ed Specialist Cal TPA. One of the positive aspects of this pandemic was that we have been able to build out our playlists and have been able to reach a number of different folks in the community. In addition, we just held 2 weeks ago our annual TPA implementation conference. Our Cal TPA conference was memorialized to recognize the work of Meredith Fellows, and that was held on July 22nd, and we invited members of the education specialist community to join that. As we move forward, we hope to develop and add more to the list that we have here by the addition of an education specialist program guide, specific office hours for education specialist programs, and adding education specialist topics to our already virtual think tanks so that we can include and broaden our perspective, not only just for the education specialist community, but it is our hope that we can bring in topics that will also benefit the general education community as well, in addition to our emerging leaders through the work of the Cal APA. I will turn it back to Amy to lead commissioners through our next steps and direction, and then for comments and questions.
Sorry. Yes. Thanks, James. And so next steps, of course, we will continue to meet with our design team virtually on Zoom and work with them in our technical contractor evaluation systems group of Pearson to continue with the work of drafting out and developing Cycle 2. We will be bringing information back to you as the pilot test unfolds and as we move our development of Cycle 2 forward. And we look forward to moving along this work and meeting our established deadlines to have an administration up and running by 2023. We are happy to answer any questions you might have at this time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Reesing and Mr. Webb and the design team that you guys gave a shout out to for the work you've done on developing the Education Specialist TPA. We will now open for public comment. Recording secretaries, are there any public comments?
We have no public comments for this item.
Okay. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? This is an information item, so no action is needed at this time. Commissioner Greenwich Shire.
Thank you. I want to thank Amy and James and the design team for this very, very complicated work. And I am in awe of everything you've done and everything you plan to do. So on behalf of all students with disabilities, thank you for this work. I appreciate the emphasis on universal design for learning, collaboration across all members of the school team, as well as all the supports that are already in place and those that will be developed. I also appreciate the caution about, or the need perhaps to delay the pilot given the COVID-19 pandemic. I know that I've heard from a couple of my colleagues in the CSU about their concern with rolling this out now, given the uncertainty of our clinical placements and the work that we're going to have to be doing at least for the next year. So I appreciate your sensitivity and thoughtfulness about that as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments by commissioners? Okay, Chair Sloan.
I'm not surprised that this work is so thorough. This team has been doing this kind of work for a long time now, but it is really impressive. And there are a couple of things that just stood out to me again as I was listening to James and Amy present this item. One of it is just how focused it is on the whole child and focused on students. And it's an opportunity for new teachers to really get to learn about their students and have guidance on how to do that. The second thing that I was really reminded about was when James talked about the playlists, the YouTube channel, and the conferences that CTC recently hosted. And they were conferences for the TPA and APA community, but I participated a bit in the Cal TPA conference. And I'm just going to read you a couple of the titles of the sessions, because what struck me is what a learning community, and again, we talk about communities of practice, but what a learning community, a very large group of teacher educators have become. So one session was that I attended, Confronting Racism, White Supremacy, and Educational Inequality, Supporting Teacher Candidates with the Cal TPA by Developing Anti-Racist Educators. Another one was Assets-Based Instructional Design. Another one was Guided Self-Assessment. Another one was Higher Order Thinking Skills and Strategies. Another one was Using UDL. All of these are, and I've talked with Amy and Mary about the fact that we have to sort of market these for everyone and make sure that everyone knows this isn't just TPA coordinators or Cal APA coordinators. This is learning opportunities for everyone. And we might want to also think about how we could offer some insights to all of us commissioners into what candidates are actually doing on some of these TPAs. I think it's been a long time since we've done anything around seeing the actual candidate work, and I think it would really help us understand what this work is about. So the last thing I wanted to note was in the item itself, and Amy, I think you were going through the key components of the Ed Specialist Cal TPA, and on page 4D6 of our item, there were a number of bullet points that you went through. Two of them really stood out to me, however, and I'm going to read these two because I think it's crucially important. One was less emphasis on written evidence. Instead, candidates submit annotated video, audio files, photographs, student work, such as assessment results, lesson plans, and some written responses and reflections about practice. A second bullet point, which Amy did also talk about later, was candidates will have a choice in how to present task evidence or reflect on practice. And they can do this through written responses. They can do this through written annotations, video with annotation, audio files, photographs, and graphics. This is a really important piece because in our early days of creating performance assessments, we relied heavily on candidates to be able to write about their practice and reflect in writing and tell us in writing what they were doing. And there was a strong sentiment that candidates who are good at writing did better on these assessments because they could explain themselves better. This is an important part of assessment. These two bullet points are providing multiple ways for candidates to demonstrate their thinking and their knowledge and their skills. And this is critical. It's what we expect candidates to do with their own TK-12 students, and we're demonstrating it here in our own assessments. And we should be doing this throughout our assessment processes in higher education as well. So given that we're doing that here in our special ed TPA, I was curious, I don't know enough about these details in the Cal TPA to understand whether the general ed TPA also includes these elements. And I wondered if you might be able to answer that, Amy.
Sure. Yes, actually. So that's really where these, this concept, when we worked first with our Cal TPA design team to redevelop the commission's model, and we had representatives from the different models on that design team. So we had expertise that kind of went across the three approved models, and not fast, but at TPA and TPA. A strong desire on the part of that design team was to be very careful not to create another test that was so dependent on a candidate's capacity to write well. And from there sprang this notion of what are the ways that we can ask candidates to demonstrate their knowledge, skill, and ability as instructors, and what can we do beyond just offering that to also give the candidate choice, because we all know we have our own individual different strengths, and some are stronger at speaking, some are stronger at writing, and we wanted to make sure that the candidate, as they move through these complex assessments, had options of choice as well as many different ways, so that we could see all the different ways that they could demonstrate their knowledge. So started there, and then the design team we pulled together and have been working with over the last 6 months also embraced that. And of course, UDL speaks to that multiple modality capacity for students. So it was held over and was an important thing to hold over. And I can tell you, after reading hundreds and hundreds of submissions, not only for our teacher candidates, but our administrative candidates, and now soon our education specialist candidates, having those choices about how to present knowledge, skill, and ability, and also options that are not always dependent on writing, have been very insightful and incredibly informative to assessors that are looking at candidate work. So the number of candidates that have chosen to speak, for example, in their application apply step instead of write, are incredibly compelling. To listen to a teacher candidate speak about their practice is incredibly insightful. So we are encouraging that of our candidates, and on our design team, some of our lead assessors have even discussed how powerful that type of evidence is, and how We expect teachers to be able to articulate their understanding of learning and teaching, of course, to families and to others that are supporting the students in front of them. So it's been really interesting, and it held up well in our first 4 years of administering and implementing and assessing the Cal TPA for multiple subject and single subject. And so it was brought into the education specialist work.
Thank you. That was a really great explanation. Very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I don't see any other questions or comments. So we're going to go ahead and close this item. It was information only, so no action is needed at this time. And that will give us time to move to 4E before we go into a closed session at 2 p.m. All right, without seeing any objections, item 4C is the update on the work of the California Standards for Teaching Profession Workgroup. This item is being presented by Cara Mendoza and Karen Sacramento. This is an information item. Ms. Sacramento, will you please begin?
Good afternoon. Agenda item 4E does present an informational update on the California Standards for the Teaching Profession, the CSTP, Content Expert Workgroup. It provides information on the workgroup members and a summary of their work so far. The workgroup of stakeholders, program personnel, and teachers are reviewing and will be recommending to the Commission revisions to the California Standards for the Teaching Profession, which were originally developed and adopted in the 1990s and updated most recently in October of 2009. The CSTP describe accomplished professional practice characterized by the knowledge, skills, and abilities of effective teachers within 6 overarching domains of teaching, and have been used and applied widely in several foundational ways over time to support teachers and instructional practices. Last November, staff presented an agenda item that shared the plan to work with the selected workgroup members. An application process followed that item, and the workgroup is now in process. The application itself included an online survey, a required resume, and short answers to 2 open-ended questions. This application was posted on the Commission's website, shared in the Professional Services Division weekly newsletter, the PSDE News, and sent to teacher induction program representatives throughout the state to share with personnel. The Commission received 83 applications, and after a thorough review, 26 individuals were appointed to the CSTP workgroup by the Commission's Executive Director. Of that 26, 6 are liaisons from partner state organizations. A full list of the workgroup members and liaisons can be found in Appendix A of this item, and Cara Mendoza will now provide further information about the CSTP workgroup.
Karen, to assure representation from educators across California, applicants were asked to self-identify their gender and ethnicity, and all workgroup members were provided their type of employer and the county in which they work. As you can see at the bottom of page 2 and continuing on page 3, 7 ethnicities are represented by our workgroup members, as well as 20 LEAs, which include members from both county offices of education and districts. And 6 members are from institutions of higher education, including CSUs, UC, and private institutions. Workgroup members also come from a range of areas throughout California. 18 different counties are represented in our workgroup membership. The workgroup members bring to the table years of experience and a deep knowledge of working with the CSTP and a strong desire to be part of the process to update and refresh them. I have to say, as a sidebar, we have rock stars on this workgroup panel, for sure. So, what work has the panel completed to date? Our initial meeting, which was planned for April 2020, of course, was canceled due to COVID-19. After this, we regrouped and designed a virtual approach for the work group and held our first meeting on June 23rd via Zoom, which was co-facilitated by our colleagues at the California Department of Education and Region 15 California Comprehensive Center, and of course, co-facilitated also by Karen and me. At this convening, the panel was given its charge to make expert recommendations to the Commission for the purpose of updating and refreshing the CSTP. The June meeting was also about beginning to build the relationships needed to do this kind of work and bringing into the room the teaching performance expectations, which will serve as an important touchstone document as we can continue to refine the knowledge, skills, and abilities expected both of beginning teachers and found in the TPE to those expected of practicing first and second year educators as outlined in the CSTP. Last, our panel members shared their own reflections on the CSTP and initial considerations for updating and refreshing them. The next steps for the work group include meetings via Zoom in September and November, drafting an updated CSTP to share with the field for input, and when ready, the revised CSTP will be brought to you all to review, discuss, and approve. And with this, Karen and I are happy to field any questions.
Thank you so much. We will now open for public comment. Recording Secretary, are there any public comments?
There is no public comment on this item.
Thank you. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have questions or comments on this item? Okay. Commissioner Brown and then Chair Sloan.
I was just doing a quick look, and the work that's being done here is really stellar. And I was looking at a quick look in Appendix A, and given the two items that we've talked about today already, early childhood special education and special education in general, and also early childhood education, I know it's mentioned that the education specialist in early childhood education would be part of this, looking at the STP. I always get, you know what I mean, the standards, etc. Is there anyone in this group that is directly working with programs or children with special needs? I just can't tell from what they say in their current position, and I just thought that was important to be, that's an important voice to be there. I can understand why early childhood per se there's no one there because they don't have credentials, but certainly early childhood special ed does.
I'll go ahead and respond to that. There are a number of teachers on the panel, and then a number of induction program personnel, and all induction programs work with both general ed and education specialist teachers. So those induction programs work directly with teachers working in education specialist.
Great, and I'm seeing Kara nod her head as well. Just wanted to make sure that voice is part of this, as we've worked so hard over the years to commingle general ed with special ed.
Yeah, and also that's seen in preliminary. We have an intern director who works again with education specialist candidates.
Okay, thank you.
There's also one of these panel members just can't get enough of work with the commission, because Julie Sheldon serves not only on the CSTP panel, she serves on the special education TPA development group. So there definitely is cross-pollination across special ed and general ed.
And I'll just add real quickly, because I know you need to break. We've already, as a group, these rock stars have already started talking about the lenses through which we will look at the CSTP, which includes for our special needs students, which includes social emotional learning, which includes inclusion, culturally relative pedagogy, the whole works. So thank you for that comment.
Great,
we're on
thank
it.
Thank you for the reassurances. Chair Sloan? And then we have two other questions. After Chair Sloan, we'll go with Commissioner Martin and Commissioner Grenoshire.
Just to echo the gratitude for the work that the committee is undertaking, and also the Rockstar work group members thinking about at this point in time all of the different places that people are coming from and all of the different learning that they are engaging in right now in understanding bias and all of these things that we probably didn't think about as carefully when we first convened the work around the CSTPs. But now, as we are really fine-tuning our lenses in all of our learning, I'm excited to see how the work rolls out. And also, I think our strategic planning might help us think about if there are other processes that we want to make sure that we go through to ensure that this very critical piece, these CSTPs, are where we want them to be when we bring them back out into the field for our work. So thank you both for your presentation and your work on this so far.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Martins.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to say that one of our teachers from San Diego Unified, Thomas Courtney, is part of this group, and getting his feedback and his participation, we were really happy to hear that a big part of the dialogue at the work group was to have on everyone's radar the importance of social emotional learning. And that, the document has to be brief and poignant, but the fact that there was quite a conversation about how to incorporate this really important, massive ideal into a document for teaching standards was heartening, both to the teacher from San Diego Unified, Thomas Courtney, who was part of it, but also it's essential to the work that we're doing in our district. And I keep saying now more than ever, social emotional learning has always been important, but truly now more than ever, and that the practice has to be pedagogically sound. And the fact that it's best addressed throughout the school day, throughout the school site, and throughout teacher practice, because too often social emotional learning is seen as a small lesson, a standalone, a series of lessons. It's a point in time rather than fully incorporated into the teaching day and into the school and into the district. And so whatever types of evidence-based positive outcomes and programs needs to be there. Those are out there, they're plentiful, but the outcomes will always say that there has to be a holistic approach, and Castle talks about that. So I think everybody's on the right track putting this in there, and the teacher from San Diego Unified who's participating was very heartened by the conversation, and it's very much aligned to our beliefs as a school district and I think our beliefs as a state. So I think it's heading in the right direction, and the fact that social emotional learning is key to all students being able to learn and have the support they need to be effective in their learning.
Great. Glad to know one of your teachers is one of the rock stars. All right, Commissioner Greno-Shires, that's the last comment I see for this from the commissioners. Let me know if I missed anybody after Commissioner Greno-Shire.
Thank you. I too want to express my gratitude to Kara and Karen and members of this work group for the work that will be proceeding. I would ask that Kara and Karen send the message to this work group that we began today with, and that is, I hope there is deep thinking and action that results in anti-racist curriculum, culturally responsive pedagogy, and experiences and knowledge that allow our future counselors, teachers, and leaders to be the change agents that are necessary to disrupt these systemic inequities in education that have just been surfaced. They've been there, as we've said over and over again today, but the COVID-19 pandemic has shone a very harsh light on these inequities. This is the time to, as we're looking at the CSTPs, to really be bold in our action and developing competencies that will result in the kinds of educators we need right now.
Great. Well, unless there's any other questions, just show me like a real hand. I didn't see any in the virtual. We're going to move to close this item. This is an information item, so no actions needed at this time. Thank you, Dr. Mendoza and Ms. Sacramento. I believe my role today, I probably can recess the Educator Preparation Committee until tomorrow, and I'll turn this back over to Chair Sloan.
Thank you, Commissioner Martinez. Well done. I will now recess the general session. Members of the commission will go into closed session. Commission staff, when should we prepare to be ready for a closed session?
We will actually email all of you once the conference line is open. So look out for your email.
All right.
We're expecting that to be right around 2 o'clock.
It's hard to say. It could take 20, it could take half hour. So because the system take a while to record, keep the one right now and reboot the system.
It won't be sooner than 2 o'clock, but it could be
Yes.
2:15, 2:20.
That's correct. It won't be sooner
stand
than
by
2
your
o'clock.
phones and you'll hear from us.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Then the general session will reconvene at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.